Good day. I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14, presented by Bearded Iris. Got my friend Matt Moscona on with me today. And when we talk LSU sports, baseball, football, basketball, this is our go-to guy in the Bayou State. He is, I call him ESPN Radio Louisiana. I don't know if it's quite that broad, but it's pretty close. If you live in that state, you know who he is. Matt, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Lots going on. Baseball, spring football, NFL draft. I'm sure it's just another day at the office for you, right?
I don't know about you, man. I love the spring. I mean, everybody loves
Yeah.
fall, of course, because it's football season. But man, in football, you go so deep on one topic. And in the spring, especially here, and I guess it's kind of similar for you guys up there because, like, you can talk college baseball around Vanderbilt. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but the fact that we can talk college baseball, you got spring football, and then there's so much crossover with New Orleans and Baton Rouge that we could talk Saints and Pelicans. Like, it's like Zion Williamson plays anywhere in the state. You know what I mean? So it's I love the springtime, man. It's just I love being able to kind of spread our wings a little bit and talk about a lot of different things.
Yeah. Other than allergies and stuff, it doesn't get much better than March and April. And I don't know how much you deal with here. We deal with it a lot here in Nashville. But in any case, LSU is about where we thought LSU would be before the season. I know, that lineup looks like, how do you beat them? The pitching got loaded up. I think you half expect them to go unbeaten through the season. But of course, that's not the way baseball works. And they've had a couple of bumps in the midweek. But, checking in on the big picture again, we're sitting here. It's the last week of April, and LSU, I don't know if LSU would definitively be the 1 seed in the NCAA tournament today, but it'd be no lower than 3. And so from that standpoint, LSU is, I guess, right where we figured it would be before the season, Matt.
In that sense, yes. How they got there, I don't think that we would have thought this. There are guys who we thought would be major contributors that are not. Thatcher Hurd was a UCLA transfer that we just assumed was going to be the number 2 guy behind Paul Skenes, and he has really struggled. He had a back injury a year ago that cost him much of his freshman season at UCLA, but when he pitched, he was dynamic. I mean, he had a sub-2 ERA. He was awesome. He has really struggled to find that command. Stuff's great. Command has been an issue. And they are trying to find some role where he fits. Christian Little, Vanderbilt transfer, has worked his way now into the rotation as the number 3 guy. We'll see if that sticks. You got a freshman like Jared Jones, who's a big-time prospect out of Georgia, who came in as a catcher, who now has sort of found his everyday spot in the lineup at first base, moving Trey Morgan to left field. So it looks a lot different than we thought it was going to look at the start of the season. The things that we knew were going to happen was Dylan Cruz was going to play center and be really good, and Paul Skenes was going to be the Friday night guy and be really good. Those things have happened, but a lot of other stuff has changed. But I think what it's done, Chris, is it's really illustrated and shown a light on the depth on this team, and that is probably the most impressive part of this team is just how much depth they have.
Well, I don't know that we knew Dylan Cruz would hit 485, but we'll table that for a minute because although you never rule it out with that kid, right?
What's that?
I know he was like, I think the last time I looked, it was 540, and I looked down, I'm like, what happened? But I mean, it seems like you check the box score, he'll go hitless, and he still walks twice. So
he's there's the conversation that's going on in these parts now that is he the best player to ever come through the program? And at a place like LSU, so often those conversations have to begin with, well, what did you do in Omaha? And he hasn't been. As a matter of fact, the odd thing is Dylan Cruz has not even played a postseason game at Alec Box Stadium, which it would have been a total crime if he had gone his whole career without playing postseason at the box. And he's going to get a chance to do it this year. So, but as far as tools, I would argue that he is the most gifted baseball player I've ever seen at LSU. And there's been some great ones roll through here. People bring up Alex Bregman a lot, who was the number 2 overall pick and has obviously had a great start to his career with Houston. But I'll remind you, Chris, Alex in his 3 seasons in Baton Rouge hit 21 home runs total in 3 seasons. Dylan Cruz hit 22 as a sophomore. So the real big difference is that power stroke came immediately, and it has never left. He is something to behold, man. You run out of adjectives to describe a guy like that. He's awesome.
Yeah, no. Look, I will say in Alex Bregman's defense, you needed a sledgehammer to hit the ball out of the park. A lot of the time he was playing or close to it. The ball's in the bats or whatever the reason is, or the conditions are much more favorable to offense right now than they were then. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Cruz to me, and I followed it for 20 years. I could make the case that when Dylan Cruz is done. In fact, I say I would make the case. I can't even think of somebody that I would give you a counter argument with. I mean, I could name names, but I don't know who would dethrone him. I think Dylan Cruz has had the best career of anybody I've watched over the last 20 years of baseball in the SEC and maybe in college baseball.
The only thing, I think there's different ways that you can kind of categorize this conversation, right? So, best player and then best career. Well, best career, are we talking about individual stats and accolades, or are we talking about team success to accompany it? And that's where things here are judged. So people in Baton Rouge will remember names like Trey Hodges, who looked, and Trey went on to pitch in the show for the Braves, but Trey was the MVP of the 2000 College World Series, and he really struggled to find his consistent role that full season in 2000. And in Omaha, it clicked. He was incredible, led LSU to a national championship. So he's a legend here forever because of it. So it'll be really interesting to see what Dylan and this squad can do in June, because right, wrong, or indifferent, for better or worse, that is how teams and players are judged here. Look, Chris, Vanderbilt's had some great teams. You know that. I mean, the David Price team that was the #1 seed that lost their home regional, like, that's not how you want to be remembered, right? I mean, LSU's 2013 and 2015 teams had arguably the best seasons in LSU baseball history, but all people here are going to remember is that 2013 went 0-2 in Omaha, and 2015 went 1-2 in Omaha, and they didn't win a championship. So, like I said, it's an unfair standard, but it's just the reality around here.
Well, I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I've been doing a lot of thinking. If I'm a Major League GM, and I guess the Pirates have the first pick, and maybe some of that depends on organization, but who are you taking? Because, I mean, right at this point, it's got to be either Skenes or Cruz, right?
Yeah. And by the way, that's never happened before, that players have gone 1-2 from the same school in the baseball draft, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen this year.
Right.
I talk to scouts, as I'm sure you do as well, and my understanding is that Washington wants Paul Skenes. They feel he is a front of the rotation guy today in Washington. And so they're kind of hoping that Pittsburgh takes Dylan. They can't lose either way, but if Pittsburgh takes Dylan and then Paul goes #2 to Washington. The one thing, I'm taking Dylan Cruz. I'm going to take the guy that's going to bat in the middle of my lineup and be an everyday player at a premium position, and maybe generational type talent who I would expect will get drafted, play rookie ball, and then at some point next spring or summer will be in the show. But Skenes is interesting too, because we don't typically see. We've seen a bit of a change, I would say, in the draft with how they view college pitchers and college pitchers at the top of the draft. The other thing with Cruz to keep in mind too is the money. Look, Dylan had a gigantic number coming out of school, and if he did not get his number, he was going to school, and it was a big number, and he bet on himself, and he's going to win. But his slot value is over $9 million, and if Pittsburgh doesn't want to pay him the money, do they go a different direction just because they don't want to pay that amount? I don't know. I mean, and that's an inherent problem with the baseball draft and with a place like Pittsburgh and all those things in. But if you're just looking at it, of all the objective data we have, Dylan Cruz should be the #1 pick in the draft, and Pittsburgh would be silly to draft anybody else.
Yeah, call me crazy. If you're not going to pay Dylan Cruz slot value, you've made a gigantic mistake. I get trying to save money and get talent further down the line, but my goodness, I think he's about as close to a sure thing major league hitter as I've seen. And I'm with you, and I'm not knocking Paul Skenes here, right? This is what we do when we are breaking down these kind of elite decisions. But my thing with Skenes and what I've seen him pitch, it's eye-popping, right? I mean, I think it was the Tennessee start where he really got it rolling, second, third, fourth inning. He's got 3 or 4 pitches working, and you're like, how does anybody ever hit this kid? Yeah. But I heard all the superlatives about him coming from Air Force. I'm like, that's great, but that's the Mountain West, and this is the SEC, and I'd like to see how that goes over the long haul. And of course, it's been pretty impressive, but it's still really only 2/3 of a season right now against elite competition. Look, you can be nearly blind and see what anybody would see in him, but that and being a pitcher and just the certainty with Dylan Cruz is why I would agree with you.
Yeah, I think the thing with drafting a pitcher is you wonder how long it's going to take that pitcher to be a part of your rotation. And then how quickly do you get to arbitration or that second contract? And are you willing to pay that player what it would cost? And that may be the issue with Pittsburgh. But I'll tell you, Chris, I think that's one of the reasons Washington likes Paul Skenes so much is they feel like he is a ready-made part of their rotation. And if that's the case, you get him for 5 or 6 seasons in your rotation, then you decide what to do. Are you going to pay him? Or are you going to trade him for a barrel full of assets? And those are the high level conversations that GMs and their front office people have, and they'll make those decisions. But I think the one thing that's clear is, barring something unforeseen and some gigantic upset, we're going to see Cruz and Skenes go 1-2 in this draft. And I would say Paul Skenes is the best arm talent I have ever seen at LSU. And Dylan Cruz is the best player I've ever seen at LSU. To have both those guys on the same team is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I think if you're Washington, I think Josiah Gray was their opening day starter, who would have been probably a 5 on a lot of staff. So there's plenty of room to slot him in pretty quickly. And I don't see the risk of doing it as long as you don't ruin his confidence or run up the pitch count, which they're going to be careful after Steven Strasburg, I'm sure. But anyway, enough about the Nats. Let's talk about the pitching staff, because I think that's going to determine whether you and I are doing a show a couple days after Omaha's done and talking about whether LSU won it all or didn't. And look, this team has had some tough breaks. The Grant Taylor injury, I think he would have been their second best pitcher behind Skenes. From what I hear, you would know better than I would. Chase Shores was great, has been great, but he's hurt. He's done for the year. Garrett Edwards, who was phenomenal for them. I think Garrett Edwards was probably one of the top 10 pitchers in the league, starter reliever, because of what he could give them. He could come in high leverage spots. He could pitch a lot of innings. You mentioned the thing with Thatcher Hurd. I don't know what the deal is there, but I would have to think it's mental to some degree. They have had some tough breaks with this pitching staff, but Nat Atkinhusen's pitching again. He's been pretty good. They've got a couple of freshmen in in Herring and Guidry who've been pretty good. You got the Christian Little experiment, which if you've got a serviceable third starter as LSU with that lineup, you'll be fine. Where are they going forward with their pitching with what we know is not available?
Yeah. Well, the bad news is what you just laid out, is that there was a lot of really good arms that they were counting on that are either injured or not performing. I mean, Grant Taylor was the idea was for Grant Taylor to be the closer on this team. They went through their preseason workouts, and he was the second best pitcher on the team. So he was going to start the season in the rotation. Well, he blew out. Tommy John, done for the year. We mentioned Thatcher Hurd, who has just really struggled, and I'm not so sure that it's just mental, Chris. I mean, he had a back injury last year against UCLA, and I think there's or when he was at UCLA, and I think some of that is lingering, and maybe it's just the confidence to let loose given what he's been through with a back injury. But you can understand why, if you're a pitcher and you have a back injury, that's going to affect you. Yeah, you're right. Like Chase Shores is a 6'8" freshman that was throwing 100. I mean, he became the first guy out of the bullpen, and then he blew out. And Garrett Edwards was a guy that they put in every leverage situation, and he's done for the year. So there aren't many teams in baseball, Chris, that can lose Taylor, Hurd not perform, Shores, Edwards, and just keep on rolling. But the depth of this team has been tested. But here's the thing: if you want to flip it, they have plenty of arms. Okay.
Yes.
Skenes is great. Ty Floyd has the ability. His issue throughout his career has been command. This last weekend, he went 8 1/3, was magnificent. It was by far the best outing of his career. You mentioned
great.
Christian Little. Griffin Herring and Gavin Guidry are two freshmen that have performed exceptionally well. Bryce Collins came over to LSU from Arizona with Jay Johnson. He has really emerged in his last 5-6 outings. You mentioned Ackenhausen, who's a JUCO lefty coming out of the bullpen, who they like. Riley Cooper's a guy who they leaned on a lot last year. My point is, I'm just throwing out names.
Blake Money,
yeah, which is so interesting because Blake, to tell you what a contrast year to year LSU is. Blake Money was started opening night a year ago.
Yep,
and
I remember.
There aren't innings for him on this team.
Yeah.
But my point is they have enough arms. They just need those guys to be able to string together good performances. I say just like it's an easy thing to do, but if those guys string together solid performances and you give that offense a chance, that's why LSU just keeps winning games and winning series. They're just deeper and more talented than everybody they play. And I really think the key is Ty Floyd. I mean, if Ty Floyd can be a legit number 2, LSU is going to be an impossible out, because if you go Skenes, Floyd, and you win those first 2 in any postseason format, regional, supers, or Omaha, I don't know how teams string together wins against this lineup when you get deep into their pitching staff. So I think it all comes down to Ty Floyd, man. I think he is the key to this thing for LSU, because everything else I think they feel really good about.
Yeah, I think the only way you could beat them in that circumstance is if you had 7, 8, 9, and 10 guys who can all pitch to some degree, kind of like Mississippi State had a few years ago, to where maybe you can get a batter here. But I mean, we're really having to squint hard to see that one.
Yeah, I mean, they're look. I mean, Chris, there's a reason they're a consensus number 1, and they are what they are. They can be beaten. They have vulnerabilities, absolutely they do. But for LSU, I think the biggest thing for Jay Johnson is make sure the path to Omaha runs through Baton Rouge. If you play a home regional and home super, there have just not been many teams throughout the history of that facility that have been able to come in here and win in May and June. So that path to Omaha runs through Alec Box, regardless of what the seed number is next to LSU, as long as it's an 8 or smaller. LSU is going to be in Omaha, and then you give the ball to Paul Skenes game 1, and if he does what he does, you're in the winner's bracket, and then it's going to take an upset to beat this team.
Well, here's the other thing I like about them, and I know I've kept you a little longer than I intended to, but there's a lot to talk about with this team. I heard someone say that, that maybe the bottom part of the LSU lineup wasn't great. I don't know what people are watching. I think that's the thing about LSU that probably, as much as Cruz and White in middle of that order, you got Jared Jones, you got Gavin Dugas, who's been hurt, but he's getting better. He's great. Trey Morgan is on base machine, has been since he got there. Braden Jobert, Jordan Thompson's hit. They got some guys off the bench. Paxton Kling's a guy who's done some things. I mean, that's the thing. I would, if I'm sitting near the dugout, I would rather pitch against a lineup that, say, has got a Cruz and a White. Not that it's easy, but then you can get around the last 4 or 5 guys in the lineups. To me, that's what makes LSU super duper tough, is that there's just not a break in that lineup that I'm much seeing.
Who said the bottom 3rd or 4th of LSU's line?
I heard it somewhere. I'm not gonna name names to incriminate the guilty, but I was just thinking, what am I missing something? Because when I watch this team, that's not what I'm seeing.
So if you want to run through the bottom 3rd, so when they're healthy, right, and they line it up as they want to line it up, your 7-hole hitter is Braden Jobert, who hit 19 homers a year ago.
Yeah,
that's your 7-hole hitter. Okay.
Yeah.
Your 8-hole is Jordan Thompson, who's a 3-year starter, and Jay Johnson has said on a team with Dylan Cruz, Jay Johnson has said, in a clutch situation, there is nobody I'd rather have at the plate than Jordan Thompson. Came up with the big hit in the Thursday game against Tennessee at the box several weeks ago. Like, that's your 8-hole hitter. Like, Jordan Thompson on most teams is hitting 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. Like, most teams in his life, he has been the 1, 2, or 3-hole hitter. He's the 8-hole hitter on this team. And then 9th is their catcher. It's been freshman Brady Neal. He's dealing with a little bit of a foot injury. So Alex Milazzo, who's a fourth-year guy, who's really a defensive ace, and he's hitting 340 or something like that right now. I mean, there is no break in this lineup. It's why they're devastating. I mean, Chris, we've literally seen teams intentionally walk Dylan Cruz to get to Tommy White, who's leading the country in RBIs.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I think that they have intentionally passed Cruz with guys on first and second, putting a guy at third to pitch to Tommy White, which is incredible. And it also tells you how feared Dylan Cruz is.
It happened last week against Kentucky, sorry, against Ole Miss, and Tommy White hit a grand slam. I mean, it's just pick your poison. I mean, are you going to pitch to Dylan Cruz with runners at second and third, or are you going to choose to pitch to Tommy White? I mean, it's unenviable. I just chuckle. I mean, you just don't see it in college baseball. It's just not a regular thing. Like these guys, a lot of times these guys just don't make it to campus, and now you got them hitting back to back in a lineup that's, oh, by the way, got Gavin Dugas, who, led the SEC in RBI 2 years ago, and Trey Morgan, who's been a starter and, is just handles the bat and is on base machine, hitting ahead of them. So, I mean, I mean, I know it sounds, I get it. Someone's probably listening or watching us, Chris, and going, oh, the LSU homer guy gushing. I'm just telling you, like, I've watched LSU baseball my whole life. They've never had a lineup like this. It's not to say, look, you know the stat, Chris. They went to the Super Regional format in '99. The first year they went to that format, Miami was the number 1 national seed, won the national championship. Mm-hmm. Since then, no number 1 national seed has won the national title. So I'm not like making room in the trophy case, right? I mean, it's college baseball. Yeah. We've seen Coastal Carolina win a national championship, right? We saw Fresno State as literally the last team in the field win a national championship.
Yeah. And Ole Miss.
Ole Miss a year ago. Great. Exactly. Basically with 2 arms, Yeah. It's baseball. Weird things happen. But I'm just telling you, like, objectively, this team is just an embarrassment of riches, for a college baseball.
No, I see it. I see it too. And I guess the thing is, if you're superstitious, which I'm not, but you really want Wake Forest to get that 1 seed, I guess. And I think it's possible, because I think the SEC can just continue beating up on itself and taking a game from LSU here and there, enough to make that happen. I mean, I think Wake is going to win the ACC. I think LSU is going to end up winning the overall title. Probably you got South Carolina and Vandy a little ahead of them, but Vandy's springing leaks a little bit. South Carolina, I think the schedule gets a little tougher. Is for LSU, you got Alabama this weekend, which would be a tough matchup. And then really the last tough matchup will be at Georgia, where Georgia's played exceptionally well at Foley Field. And you could get in a slow pitch softball contest down there, and who knows how that's going to turn out. But I would still favor LSU, but I'm just saying they've been tough in that park. Have you ever been to it though?
No.
It is a beautiful environment. Oh, it's gorgeous. But
I'm sure. No, I'm sure it is. I
don't like the short fences in this league.
Look, I mean, Chris, every time I have a conversation with baseball people, and I consider myself one. I mean, I'm a baseball nerd, but I get laughed at. I hate the fact that there isn't uniformity with outfield walls. I mean, a great example is LSU played at Ole Miss this past weekend. Ole Miss is 365 to the alleys and 385 to straightaway center. Alec Box in Baton Rouge is 385 to the alleys and 405 to straightaway center. There were home runs hit by both teams in that Ole Miss series that would have just been fly ball outs at the box. I get it. Look, I'm a Yankee fan. Short porch and right. Aaron Judge has made a living off of it. It's like he's literally made a very nice living off of it. This is a sport where we once had a flagpole in the field of play on a hill in center field in Houston. So yes, to see 310 down the line at an SEC park at Foley Field is patently absurd. I hate it very much. Anyway.
Well, I mean, we could do a whole podcast on this. I think the stuff with the bats and the balls, whatever, it's absurd. I don't know how anybody pitches anymore, which makes what Skenes is doing more incredible. Although if nobody's hitting the ball, last I checked, he had a 50-something% strikeout rate. If you can't put it in play, it doesn't matter. But no,
He's ridiculous.
This is my litmus test, okay? And I saw this happen last weekend. If an average runner can line a single off the wall and get thrown out at second base, then unless the fence is 30 feet tall, it needs to be moved out immediately.
Yeah, that's a very fair litmus test. I'll be a little more general because that's a very specific example. If a batter puts a bad swing on a good pitch and it leaves the park, that's a problem. If a batter puts a good swing on a bad pitch and it's just a fly ball out, that's also a problem. That was the problem at TD Ameritrade early. When they first moved from Rosenblatt. And I get it, Rosenblatt was a launching pad, but I know it's not TD Ameritrade anymore, but when it was TD Ameritrade. I mean, the one that I've always used is LSU had a third baseman named Chris Chinea, and it was 2013, and they were playing UCLA, and UCLA had a pitcher. It was the year UCLA won the Natty. UCLA had a pitcher that was throwing mid-upper 80s. I mean, and he grooved Chris Chinea a belt-high fastball at about 87 miles an hour, and Chinea crushed it. I want to tell you, he didn't miss it. I mean, he crushed it, and it was a fly ball out to right center. I mean, a pitcher shouldn't be rewarded for that. So that's always been my thing, and you see that too often. Look, Chris, this may not be popular with some of your South Carolina viewers, or listeners. Like, I think that's going to be a problem for South Carolina. Having watched LSU play the series there. Now, Petrie's fantastic, and I get why people are excited about it, but that place is a bandbox. And a lot of the fly balls that leave the yard there are going to be long outs in Omaha. And that's going to be a problem for that team.
I saw it a little differently when they were in Nashville. I saw them in person a couple of days, and some of the ones they hit would have been out of Yellowstone Park. So in that case, it doesn't really matter. Sure. And like with Petrie, but I get what you're saying. And like, I'll give you, I watched Vanderbilt in Tennessee last week. Tennessee got 6 hits in the Friday night game. 4 of them were home runs. I don't think any of them were out if that's in Nashville, but that's a game changer. And I do think, so I think that's what, but I think LSU is dangerous under any circumstance, but I do think there's going to be some park dependency that's going to be very interesting when some of these teams get to postseason. And if you're Florida and LSU and some of these teams, you in Carolina, I think you definitely want some of those games played in your park rather than somewhere else. Now, I think LSU could make it happen anywhere because I think they've got enough pieces. And here's one thing we didn't talk about, and then I'll let you go in a second, Matt. They kicked the ball around the park last year like it was soccer. Now I'm not watching them all the time, but the fielding percentage number's a lot better. I know you've had the weird thing with Morgan is at first sometimes and then left some other times. And I'm not sure entirely what's behind that. You mentioned Milazzo. So that's another thing. Their lineup last couple of years, you got to 7 or at least 8 and 9, and it was an automatic out. That's not there this year. But it feels like they've got some pieces defensively that maybe they've not had the last couple of years.
But offensively, a year ago, if LSU wasn't run producing 2, 3, 4, it wasn't coming. I mean, it was just completely reliant on Morgan and Cruz and guys like that. Defensively, it's interesting. So they were atrocious a year ago. Statistically, one of the worst fielding percentages in LSU baseball history. Chris, I actually went back and for as long, you can't always find great records from 1986. College baseball didn't exactly have great scorekeeping then, but as far back as I could find, and I'm not looking at it right now. I actually did tweet this last year. There was only maybe a handful of seasons ever that I could find where LSU had a worse fielding percentage than they did a season ago. They were objectively very bad. Until about 3 weeks ago, they were actually leading the country in fielding percentage. The last 3 weeks, it's gotten a little dicey though. They have not been playing clean ball the last 3 weeks, and it cost them. In the midweek, which you referenced earlier, against Nichols on Tuesday. Nichols was pristine defensively. I mean, they had literally the number 1 SportsCenter top 10 play, which ended the game. Was a a beautiful running catch and a double up run for second. But that's something that LSU has to clean up. And you hope that just look, I mean, over the course of a season, you play 56, you're going to have ebbs and flows. Everybody knows that. But if and maybe this is just a mid-season lull where they are having some snafus. I mean, against Kentucky, the game they lost against Kentucky, there was a fly ball. Look, it was consecutive. They brought in Griffin Herring, right? So LSU's up 6-3, and there's runners on first and second. Ground ball to Tommy White at third, and he boots it. One pitch should have been out of the inning. Instead, bases are loaded. Herring gets a fly ball to right. Braden Joubert overruns it. It falls.
Yeah.
3-run misplay, and LSU's losing the game. They were going to lose. So there have been some leaks in the dam here in the last 3 weeks or so. So that is definitely something worth watching with LSU moving forward to see if they can shore up the defense the way they were for the first 8 weeks of the season, 6-7 weeks of the season, or do they continue trending downward with their fielding percentage? It's definitely something worth watching because they got to back up their pitching with the questions they've had on days 2 and 3.
All right, last question for you. I want to go back 2 topics ago. You and I are on the same page with the offense and the bats and balls and everything. I just think it's cheapening the game. Knowing the NCAA and Major League Baseball is really no better. It seems like when they correct, they really overcorrect to back when, what it was 2013, 2014, whenever it was, where you couldn't get it out with anything. And I don't think that was good ball either. The pendulum always seems like it swings too far to one way or the other. But I'm thinking with some of the exit velocities and stuff, I mean, I'm just shocked nobody's gotten hurt. A line drive off the pitcher's forehead or a ball that hits a 2-year-old somewhere in the stands. And it was an issue last year, and it's only getting worse. Are you hearing about the NCAA or anybody doing anything with the equipment or whatever to make it more like baseball and less like pinball for next year?
Not that I've heard. If anything, I think the argument that people will talk about publicly is that it feels like it's gone to the contrary, to where they've quietly juiced the balls to try to get more offense into the game. I mean, that's the thing. Listen, I'll because he said it on the record. I mean, I had this conversation on my radio show with Ben McDonald, of course, who works for the SEC Network and ESPN, was a great pitcher at LSU, Golden Spikes, and number 1 pick in the draft. Ben has said he thinks they're juicing the balls. And how does that happen? How do you get away with it? I don't know. I mean, I don't know that there's this secret lab where they're but I also know that guys who spend their whole life holding a ball and throwing a ball know what they're looking at, right? It's, you remember when, do you remember when Deflategate happened with Tom? Of course you do, but the Tom Brady Deflategate thing. I remember Drew Brees went on Conan, late night show with Conan. And Conan did a bit where he handed footballs to Drew Brees and just said, "Tell me the PSI on these," right? And so here's Brees. You look it up on YouTube. He just hands them, and Brees guessed correctly the exact PSI on every one of the balls. But think about it. This man, his entire life has held a ball in his hand and thrown it thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times. He should know that. So when pitchers who make a living holding a ball and throwing a ball all the time, they know when something's different. So I believe that. What is it? I don't know. I mean, listen, I am not for what college baseball did. 2011 was the year when they deadened the bats. I remember because I remember talking to Mikey Matuk about it during his junior year. Obviously Matuk went on to be a first round pick, but I'm definitely not for that. I'm not for college baseball trying to look like Major League Baseball. One of the things that's great about college baseball is you do have more offense, but I don't want artificial offense. I don't want the rocket launchers of the 1990s in guys' hands. But I do believe that there's a happy medium. I think what's happened is the level of pitching in college baseball with guys like Paul Skenes or Kumar Rocker or guys who really have no business being in college, showing up to college has changed the game. And I think maybe they had to find a way to get more offense, inject more offense into college baseball. And so perhaps they like when they deadened the bats and maybe went too far one direction, do they bring it back to the mean? I don't know, but I still think college baseball is in a healthy, good place. It could always tweak it. It could always tweak and be better. But seeing full stadiums and places even outside of the SEC, Chris, that are latching on to college baseball and loving it and growing it. It's a fantastic thing to see, man. It's so normal to me. As an 8-year-old, I'd go practice baseball on a Tuesday night, and then we'd go over to the box and catch the middle 3 before I went home and did homework and went to bed. That's just always been part of my life. And I love to see the game grow in other parts of the country too.
Yeah, well, and I think the thing that's different too is now there are active beat writers on every SEC team covering the team. Like 5 years ago, nobody was covering Tennessee. I don't know how much, and now everybody's covering Tennessee.
2 years ago, there was nobody covering Tennessee.
Right. That's a whole other story. But yeah, I mean, even Florida was so good for so long, and you couldn't find much coverage down there. Alabama and Auburn, they're just obsessed with spring football. Now you're getting some stuff there. I think the game is really taken on. I think what happened in Knoxville with getting that fan base, I mean, there's some good and some bad with it, but they're interested, and now they know what everybody else knows. The game times are shorter. I think you're seeing a lot of it. To me, if you can get the offense and do something with the transfer portal and NIL money and tampering, that's a whole other story. We won't get into today, but I think they really have a chance to make the game phenomenal. It's already really good, but I think, some major tweaks in a couple more areas, and then we really will have something.
Well, if you ever want to have a conversation about NIL and transfer portal, I am more than happy to do that because I love both of them, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So if you want a counterpoint, I'll happily have that conversation one day.
Yeah, I don't know that I like them together in the measures that they've been, but I think there's obviously a place for players to get paid, and I don't think players need to be, beholden to the same place for 4 years necessarily. But anyway, that would be a longer podcast than the one we've just done, which I didn't plan on it going 37 minutes, but I should have known better. When we get you and I in the same, and I don't mind it at all. I'm just worried for your schedule because I know you've got a million things to do. But yeah, I mean, when you and I get together and talk baseball, it's always fun.
Anytime, man. I get a chance to just riff on college baseball, especially when the Tigers are good, man. It's a lot of fun.
Well, I have a feeling you and I are going to be talking another time or two before the season's over. Enjoy the ride down there, man. It's been fun to watch Dylan Cruz and Skenes. It really has. And that's a great thing for college baseball, is getting both those guys there. Tell folks where in the state of Louisiana, or maybe be shorter, where they can't find you. But you're all over the airwaves there. Tell folks where they can get you.
Yeah, we're all through the state. If you want to stream us, though, you can get 1045ESPN.com. Our station has an app as well where you can stream, and we stream our shows live on YouTube as well. So if you search the 1045 ESPN YouTube channel, you'll find all of our lineup of shows daily as well.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Let's run this back again soon.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right. I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14, presented by Bearded Iris. Thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Those help our analytics. We'll see you again soon with more baseball coverage at Southeastern 14.